The wagon lurched over another rut in the dusty trail, and Fiona Zimmerman gripped the wooden seat so hard her knuckles turned white as she watched her father bargaining away her future with a man whose land they needed to cross. It was 1878, and the August heat bore down on their small caravan like a furnace, waves of shimmer rising from the parched earth of southern Colorado as her father's desperate voice carried back to where she sat frozen in disbelief. "My daughter," her father was saying, his voice cracking with something between shame and survival instinct. "She'll stay with you, work for you, do whatever you need. Just let us through your land. We've got sick children in the back wagon and we're 3 days behind schedule already." The cowboy sat astride a magnificent black stallion, his weathered face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He couldn't have been more than 25, maybe 26 years old, with a strong jaw and eyes the color of storm clouds that flickered briefly toward Fiona before returning to her father. Yates Anderson was his name. According to the faded sign, they'd passed a mile back marking the edge of his property. Thousands of acres stretching between the route to Durango and certain death by the longer way around through Apache territory. "Your daughter," Yates repeated slowly, and Fiona felt her stomach twist. She was 22 years old, unmarried by choice not circumstance, and had spent the last 3 years helping her family push west after their farm in Missouri had failed. She'd survived river crossings, near starvation, and the death of her mother from fever, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. "Just until we get through," her father pleaded. "Maybe a few weeks of work to compensate for the water we'll use, the grazing rights." Yates Anderson shifted in his saddle, leather creaking. His gaze moved to Fiona again, longer this time, and she met his eyes with all the defiance she could muster despite the fear coursing through her veins. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her cower. "I don't take kindly to trading human beings like cattle," Yates said finally, his voice rough but firm. "But I'll make you a deal. Your caravan can cross my land, use my wells, rest your animals. Your daughter stays as collateral until you've made it through and sent word back that you've reached Durango safely. Then she's free to join you or go wherever she pleases." Fiona's father sagged with relief so profound it made her chest ache. "Thank you, sir. Thank you." "Fiona's a hard worker. She won't give you trouble." She wanted to scream at him, to demand how he could do this, but she saw the exhaustion etched into every line of his face and remembered the 2 small children burning with fever in the wagon behind them. Her younger siblings. If they didn't get to Durango soon, to a real doctor, they might not survive. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Yates dismounted with fluid grace and walked toward the wagon. Up close, Fiona could see he was taller than she'd thought, with broad shoulders and hands that looked strong but not cruel. His face was sun-darkened and bore a few days' worth of stubble, and there was something in his expression she couldn't quite read. Not hunger or malice, but maybe curiosity, maybe caution. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, pulling his hat off in a gesture that seemed automatic. His hair was dark brown, slightly too long, curling at his collar. "I give you my word you'll be treated with respect on my ranch. You'll have your own room, fair work, and proper meals. This isn't what you think it is." "I think I'm being traded like a sack of flour," Fiona said, hating how her voice shook slightly. "I think I don't have a choice." "You don't," he agreed, and she appreciated that he didn't try to sugarcoat it. "But I'll make it as bearable as I can. Your family needs safe passage and I need help at the ranch. My foreman broke his leg 2 weeks ago and I'm drowning in work with Roundup coming." She studied his face, looking for deception, but found only what appeared to be honest weariness. He had the look of a man who'd been working too hard for too long, and despite her anger and fear, she found herself believing him about the work, at least. "How long?" she asked. 3 days for your family to cross my land. Another 4 or 5 to reach Durango depending on those sick children. A week and a half, maybe 2 at most. Fiona looked back at her father, who couldn't meet her eyes. She thought about her siblings, about the baby sister who'd been crying for 2 days straight with fever, about the brother barely 10 years old who'd stopped complaining about being hungry because there wasn't enough food to go around. She thought about her mother's grave somewhere back in Kansas, marked only with a wooden cross that had probably blown over by now. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll stay." The goodbyes were brief because anything longer would have shattered them all. Her father pressed a worn Bible into her hands, the only thing of value he had left. Her oldest brother, just 18, promised he'd come back for her himself if anything happened. The children were too sick to understand, and that was probably a mercy. Within an hour, the wagons were rolling again, trailing dust as they headed north across Yates Anderson's land, and Fiona stood beside a man she didn't know, watching her family disappear into the shimmering heat. "My horse can carry us both," Yates said after the wagons vanished from sight. Ranch House is about an hour's ride southwest. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He mounted first, then extended a hand to help her up. She ignored it and used the stirrup to pull herself up behind him, settling awkwardly on the horse's back. When the animal started moving, she had no choice but to grip Yates's waist to keep from falling, her hands pressed against the rough fabric of his shirt. They rode in silence through land that was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. The Colorado terrain here was a mixture of scrubland and scattered pine, with red rock formations rising in the distance like ancient sentinels. Despite everything, Fiona found herself appreciating the wild beauty of it, so different from the flat farmland she'd known growing up. "I built the ranch myself," Yates said suddenly, his voice carrying back to her. 5 years ago I won the land in a card game, which sounds made up but it's true. Fellow had nothing else to bet, and I had a straight flush. Everyone said I was crazy to try to make something of it, but I proved them wrong." Fiona didn't respond, but he continued anyway. "I've got about 200 head of cattle, a dozen horses, chickens, 3 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse, and a dog named Ruthie who's going to love you or hate you within about 30 seconds of meeting you. There's no predicting which." "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "I guess I want you to know this is a real working ranch, not some temporary camp. I'm not some drifter or outlaw. This is my home, and for the next couple of weeks, it'll be yours too." The ranch house appeared as they crested a low hill, and Fiona felt her breath catch despite her determination to remain unimpressed. It was larger than she'd expected. A sturdy 2-story structure built from honey-colored pine with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. There was a barn, corrals, several outbuildings, and everything spoke of someone who'd put in backbreaking work to carve out a life in this unforgiving land. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 50, with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical bun, and keen blue eyes that assessed Fiona immediately. "This is Mrs. Dorothy Crane," Yates said, dismounting and then helping Fiona down with steadier hands than she expected. "She keeps house and cooks for the ranch. Dorothy, this is Miss Fiona Zimmerman. She'll be staying with us for a couple of weeks, helping out." Dorothy's eyebrows rose slightly, but her expression remained neutral. "Welcome, Miss Zimmerman. You look about ready to collapse from heat and exhaustion. Let's get you inside and settled before anything else." The kindness in her voice, unexpected after the trauma of the day, nearly undid Fiona's careful composure. She managed a nod and followed Dorothy into the house, grateful when the older woman didn't ask questions. The interior was surprisingly well appointed, with real furniture instead of the rough-hewn pieces Fiona had expected. Dorothy led her upstairs to a small bedroom that had a real bed with a quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a window that looked out over the eastern pastures. "This was meant to be a guest room," Dorothy explained. "Mr. Yates kept saying he'd have family visits someday, though far as I know nobody's ever come. You've got privacy here. There's a lock on the inside of the door, and I'll bring you up some water for washing. Supper's at 6. "Thank you," Fiona managed. Dorothy studied her for a long moment. "I don't know your story and I won't pry, but I will say this. Yates Anderson is a good man, fair and honest. Whatever brought you here, you're safe under his roof." After Dorothy left, Fiona sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself cry. She cried for her mother, for her father's desperation, for her own fear and uncertainty. She cried for the life she'd imagined having someday, one where she wasn't traded like property to a stranger. But she didn't cry for long, because tears had never solved anything and they wouldn't start now. She washed her face in the basin, changed into the one clean dress she had in the small bag her father had given her, and tried to make herself presentable. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a young woman with auburn hair that had come loose from its pins, green eyes still red from crying, and a smattering of freckles across her nose from too much sun. She looked tired and frightened and angry all at once. Supper was an awkward affair. Besides Yates and Dorothy, there were 3 ranch hands. A grizzled man in his 50s named Pete who served as acting foreman, a younger man maybe 30 named Jim with a quick smile, and a quiet fellow called Samuel who couldn't have been more than 19. They all treated her with cautious respect, and Dorothy had clearly warned them against asking inappropriate questions. Yates sat at the head of the table, and as Dorothy served beef stew and fresh bread, he explained the ranch routine. "We're coming up on roundup season. We'll need to gather the cattle from the summer grazing areas, sort out which ones are ready for market, do branding on any calves we missed in spring. It's hard work and we're already behind schedule with Rodriguez laid up. I meant what I said about needing help. What did you expect me to do?" Fiona asked. "I don't know anything about cattle. Can you ride?" "Yes." "Can you follow instructions, work hard in the sun, and not fall apart when things get difficult?" She met his eyes squarely. "I've been traveling west for 3 years. I've buried my mother, watched my siblings nearly starve, and today I was traded away by my own father. I think I can handle hard work." Something shifted in his expression, respect maybe or understanding. "Then you'll do fine. We start at dawn tomorrow. Dorothy will find you some appropriate clothing." After supper, Fiona retreated to her room, exhausted beyond measure. She locked the door as Dorothy had shown her, then lay on the bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep seemed impossible, but at some point exhaustion won and she drifted off into uneasy dreams. She woke before dawn to the sound of roosters and men's voices in the yard below. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came crashing back. She rose, washed her face, and found that someone had left a bundle of clothes outside her door. Men's trousers that looked like they might fit, a work shirt, and a battered hat. Dorothy found her in the kitchen 10 minutes later. "Those were Yates's clothes when he was younger and skinnier," she explained. "They should fit well enough. You can't work cattle in a dress, not practically. Have some breakfast and then get out to the barn. The men are already saddling up." Fiona ate quickly, uncomfortable in the borrowed clothes but grateful they were practical. When she reached the barn, Yates was checking the cinch on his saddle. He looked her over and nodded. "Those'll work. Can you handle that mare?" He gestured to a pretty chestnut horse with a white blaze. "I'll manage." He showed her how he liked the saddle positioned. Then they rode out with the other men into the breaking dawn. The morning air was cool, a relief from the previous day's heat, and the landscape was painted in shades of purple and gold as the sun rose. The work was every bit as hard as Yates had promised. They rode for hours, searching gullies and valleys for cattle that had wandered during the summer months. When they found small groups, they herded them back toward the main pastures near the ranch. It was hot, dusty work that required constant attention and physical endurance. More than once Fiona's horse had to navigate treacherous terrain, and she was grateful for the years of riding experience she'd gained during their journey west. Yates watched her throughout the day, she noticed, but not in a way that made her uncomfortable. He was assessing her abilities, making sure she was capable, ready to step in if she faltered. But she didn't falter. She might not know cattle work, but she was a quick learner and stubborn enough not to quit. By midday, when they stopped to rest the horses and eat the lunch Dorothy had packed, Pete actually offered her a compliment. "You sit a horse well, miss. Better than some ranch hands I've seen." "Thank you," she said, too tired to say much else. Yates settled beside her in the shade of a boulder, passing her his canteen. "You did good this morning. I know this isn't what you expected." "Nothing in my life has been what I expected," she said, taking a long drink. "Not for years now." "Your mother," he said carefully. "Dorothy mentioned you buried her. I'm sorry. Fever took her in Kansas. We couldn't get to a doctor in time, just like my siblings now." The words came out bitter. "Your family will make it to Durango," Yates said with quiet certainty. "The route through my land cuts 3 days off the journey, and my wells are clean. That might be the difference." She looked at him, this stranger who'd accepted her as payment for safe passage, but who seemed uncomfortable with the transaction despite initiating it. "Why did you agree to my father's offer?" He was silent for a long moment, staring out at the horizon. "Because I remember being desperate. 5 years ago I had nothing except a gambling win that everyone said would amount to nothing. I know what it's like to need help and have nobody willing to give it." He turned to look at her. "And because I genuinely do need help on this ranch, I wasn't lying about that. But you could have just let them pass without demanding anything." "I could have," he agreed. "But I learned early that nothing in this life is free, and people value what they pay for. Your father needed to give something or he'd have felt indebted forever. This way, it's a fair trade, time limited, and everyone keeps their dignity." Fiona wanted to argue that there was no dignity in being traded, but she understood what he meant. Her father would have been crushed by pure charity, would have carried that debt like a physical weight. This way, harsh as it was, the scales would be balanced when she rejoined her family. "Will you really let me go when the time comes?" she asked quietly. His gray eyes met hers steadily. "Yes, I gave my word." Something in the way he said it made her believe him. The next several days fell into a grueling rhythm. Up before dawn, breakfast with the ranch hands, then long days riding the range searching for scattered cattle. Fiona's body ached in ways she didn't know were possible, muscles protesting the constant riding and physical work. But she was also eating better than she had in months, regular hot meals from Dorothy's kitchen, and sleeping in an actual bed. The contradictions of her situation weren't lost on her. Yates continued to work alongside them, never asking his men to do anything he wouldn't do himself. She watched him handle difficult cattle with patience, saw how he treated his horses with careful respect, noticed how he always checked that everyone had enough water during the hottest parts of the day. He was younger than she'd initially thought, probably only 24 or 25. But he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd earned his place through hard work rather than inheritance. On the fifth day, they were working a difficult section of terrain where several head had gotten themselves trapped in a narrow canyon. Fiona was helping Pete block off one end while Yates and Jim attempted to drive the cattle out the other way. Everything was going smoothly until one of the steers, a massive beast with wide horns, decided to charge rather than follow its companions. Fiona saw it happening as if in slow motion. The steer bore down on Yates, who was on foot trying to move a fallen branch from the path. He looked up too late, had just enough time to try to dodge. The animal's shoulder caught him and sent him flying into the canyon wall with a sickening crack. "Yates!" The scream tore from her throat before she could think. She spurred her horse forward, putting herself between the steer and where Yates lay stunned. The animal bellowed and turned toward her, but she held her ground, waving her hat and yelling until it finally turned and thundered off to join the other cattle. She was off her horse in seconds, kneeling beside Yates. He was conscious but clearly dazed, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "Don't move," she ordered, her hands instinctively checking for obvious injuries. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice was strained. "You're not fine. You just got thrown into a rock wall by 1,000 pounds of angry beef." Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her neckerchief to press against the bleeding cut. "Can you feel your fingers and toes?" "Yes, nurse," he said, and there was the ghost of a smile on his face despite the pain. "Though my ribs are making compelling arguments otherwise." Pete and Jim reached them, concern evident on both their faces. "Boss, you need to get back to the house," Pete said firmly. Could have cracked ribs or worse. Getting Yates back onto his horse was an ordeal, and Fiona could see him trying not to show how much pain he was in. She ended up riding beside him the whole way back, terrified he'd fall from the saddle. By the time they reached the ranch house, his face was gray and he was breathing shallowly. Dorothy took one look at him and immediately took charge. "Get him upstairs to his room. Pete, ride into town and fetch Doc Harrison. Miss Fiona, I'll need your help." Between them, they got Yates upstairs and onto his bed. Dorothy carefully removed his shirt, and they could both see the massive bruise already forming along his left side. When Dorothy gently probed his ribs, Yates flinched but insisted through gritted teeth that he'd had cracked ribs before and knew how they felt. "You'll be laid up for weeks," Dorothy said firmly. "And no arguments. You're lucky it wasn't worse." After Dorothy left to prepare poultices and pain remedies, Fiona found herself alone with Yates. She sat in the chair beside his bed, still shaking slightly from the aftermath of fear. "Thank you," Yates said quietly, "for what you did back there. That steer could have killed me if you hadn't intervened." "I didn't think," she admitted. "I just reacted. You saved my life." His gray eyes were serious and tense. "That's not nothing, Fiona." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about hearing it in his rough voice made her chest tighten. "You gave my family safe passage. Maybe this makes us even." "Maybe," he agreed, but something in his expression suggested he didn't quite believe it. The doctor arrived 3 hours later and confirmed what they'd suspected. 2 cracked ribs, severe bruising, a mild concussion, and orders for complete bed rest for at least a week, followed by light duty only for several more. Yates argued, but Doc Harrison was unmoved. "You young fools think you're invincible," the doctor said, packing up his bag. "But cracked ribs that don't heal properly can puncture a lung, and then you'll really be in trouble. Stay in bed, let your people handle the ranch, and count yourself lucky." After the doctor left, Yates lay staring at the ceiling with clear frustration. "Roundup can't wait. We're already behind schedule." "Pete knows what he's doing," Fiona said from where she still sat in the chair. Dorothy had asked her to stay with Yates while she prepared supper. and the rest of us can follow his lead. You've been here less than a week, and I've been learning fast." She stood, moving to the window. "You'll have to trust that we can handle things." "I don't have much choice, do I?" She turned back to look at him. "No. Just like I didn't have much choice about being here. Sometimes we have to trust people even when it's uncomfortable." He studied her for a long moment. "You're angry about how you came to be here. Wouldn't you be?" "Yes," he admitted. "I would be furious. But I hope you know I meant what I said. You're free to go when your time is up. Though now with me laid up, I'd understand if you wanted to leave sooner. You've more than fulfilled any obligation." Fiona was surprised to realize she didn't want to leave, not yet. Not while Yates was injured and the ranch was in chaos. Not while her family might still need the extra time she was buying them. "I'll stay," she said. "The full 2 weeks like we agreed." "Why?" His voice was genuinely curious. "Because unlike some people, I keep my word," she said, but there was no real heat in it. Then, more honestly, "and because this ranch matters to you. I can see that. You've built something real here, something worth protecting." Over the next week, Fiona threw herself into the ranch work with renewed determination. With Yates confined to bed, she and the other ranch hands worked dawn to dusk gathering cattle. Pete proved to be an excellent teacher, explaining the intricacies of cattle behavior and ranch management. Jim provided comic relief during the hardest moments, and even quiet Samuel began to open up, revealing a dry wit Fiona hadn't expected. In the evenings, after everyone else had eaten and dispersed, Fiona found herself bringing supper to Yates's room and staying to talk. At first it was just updates about the ranch work, but gradually their conversations deepened. He told her about winning the land, about the years of backbreaking work to build the ranch, about the loneliness of forging a life in this unforgiving territory. "I always thought I'd have a family by now," he admitted one evening, his guard lowered by pain medication and exhaustion. "Wife, children, the whole picture. But there aren't many women out here, and the ones who are available are either already spoken for or looking for something I can't provide." "What's that?" Fiona asked, genuinely curious. "Softness. Ease. A life that doesn't require them to work as hard as any ranch hand just to survive." He shifted carefully, trying to find a comfortable position. "Most women want what they deserve, a real home, security, comfort. I can offer the home and security, but comfort is still years away if it ever comes at all." "You're assuming all women want the same things," Fiona said, thinking about her own journey, the years of hard travel that had shaped her. "Some of us have learned that comfort is relative, and the things that matter most aren't always soft or easy." He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What matters most to you, Fiona?" She thought about it carefully. "Honesty, loyalty. Someone who sees me as a partner rather than property. Purpose." She paused. "I watched my mother fade away on the trail, and before she died, she told me not to settle for half a life. She said to find something worth fighting for, even if it was hard." Sounds like a wise woman. She was. Fiona's voice was soft with grief. "She hated leaving Missouri, but she loved my father enough to follow him. I don't know if it was worth it in the end, dying on some nameless stretch of Kansas prairie. But she never complained, not once." "Would you follow someone like that?" Yates asked. "Into uncertainty and hardship? I don't know," Fiona admitted. "I'd like to think I'd make my own choices rather than just following. That I'd be a true partner, making decisions together." Something in his expression shifted, became thoughtful in a way that made her wonder what he was thinking. On the 10th day, a rider arrived from Durango with a letter for Yates. Dorothy brought it up to his room where Fiona was changing the bandages on his still healing ribs. He opened it carefully, read quickly, then handed it to Fiona without a word. The letter was from her father. Her family had reached Durango safely, and the children were recovering under a doctor's care. They'd found work and temporary housing. Her father wrote that he'd send money for her passage as soon as he could, that she should know she was under no obligation to stay longer than the agreed-upon time, that he was sorry and grateful in equal measure. Fiona read it twice, relief flooding through her. Her siblings were safe. The gamble had paid off. She could leave with a clear conscience. She looked up to find Yates watching her carefully. "They made it," she said unnecessarily. "I'm glad, so I can go. Our agreement is fulfilled." "Yes." His voice was neutral, controlled. "I'll have one of the men take you to Durango whenever you're ready." She should have felt elated, but instead there was a hollow feeling in her chest. "What about Roundup? You're still healing and there's so much work left." "We'll manage. We always do." Fiona stood, walking to the window that overlooked the eastern pastures. In 10 days, this place had started to feel familiar, the rhythm of ranch life becoming her own rhythm. She knew which horse preferred apples over carrots, knew that Pete snored loud enough to wake the dead, knew that Dorothy hummed hymns while cooking breakfast. She knew the sound of Yates's voice in the morning during crew assignments, knew the way he pushed himself too hard and cared too much about everyone who worked for him. "What if I wasn't ready?" she asked quietly, not turning around. The silence stretched long enough that she finally turned to look at him. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't fully read, hope and fear and something deeper all mixed together. "What are you saying, Fiona?" "I'm saying that maybe I could stay a bit longer. Until you're healed enough to work properly, until Roundup is finished." She took a breath. "I'm saying that maybe I've found something here worth fighting for, even if it's hard." "You don't owe me anything more," Yates said, but his voice was rough with emotion. "The debt is paid." "This isn't about debt." She moved back to the chair beside his bed, sitting down so she could meet his eyes directly. "In 10 days, you've treated me with more respect and kindness than I've experienced in a long time. You've never made me feel like property, even though that's how I came here. You've taught me about cattle and horses and this hard, beautiful land. You've trusted me with your ranch when you had no reason to. You earned that trust. And you've earned something from me too," she said softly. "A chance. For both of us to figure out if this thing I think is growing between us is real or just circumstances throwing us together." Yates reached out carefully, his hand extended toward her. She took it, feeling the calluses and strength in his fingers as they closed gently around hers. "I didn't want to say anything. Didn't want you to think I expected something beyond our agreement. But Fiona, you've turned this ranch upside down in the best possible way. You work harder than anyone I've ever met. You're smart and capable and so damn beautiful it makes my ribs hurt more just looking at you." She laughed, unexpected and genuine. "That's the worst compliment I've ever received." "I'm not good with words," he admitted, a smile tugging at his mouth. "But I'm good with actions. If you stay, if you give this a real chance, I promise I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of that choice. Not as your employer or the man who accepted you as trade, but as someone who wants to build a life with you as an equal partner." That's a lot to promise based on 10 days. Then stay 20 days, 30, however long it takes for you to decide if this place, if I, could be what you're looking for. His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "I know I'm asking a lot. Life here is hard and lonely sometimes, and I can't offer you the ease and comfort you might find elsewhere. But I can offer you honesty, partnership, and everything I have to build a future together." Fiona felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't sad tears. "I need to write to my father. Let him know I'm staying by choice, not obligation." "Of course. And I need you to understand that if I stay, it's not because I feel trapped or because I think I have to. It's because I want to see where this leads. Because in 10 days, you've shown me more about what a real partnership could look like than I've ever seen before." Yates lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with such tenderness it made her heart ache. "I'll spend every day grateful you decided to stay." The next morning, Fiona wrote to her father explaining her decision. She tried to make him understand that she was staying by choice, that she'd found something unexpected and worth exploring. She sent money from her saved earnings, insisted they not worry, and promised to write regularly. As Yates healed over the following weeks, their relationship deepened. He taught her the intricacies of ranch management during the hours he was confined to light duty, explaining the business side she hadn't seen before. She discovered he could read and write well, that he had a head for numbers and planning, that he dreamed of expanding the ranch but wanted to do it sustainably. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 15, about making his way north and learning to survive by his wits and determination. She shared stories about Missouri, about the farm that had failed, about her mother's strength and her father's dreams. They debated politics and religion, discussed books they'd read and places they hoped to see someday. But it wasn't just talking. It was the way he looked at her when she came in from a long day of work, dirty and exhausted but satisfied. It was the gentle way he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when they sat on the porch in the evenings. It was the day he was finally cleared for light riding and insisted she accompany him to his favorite spot on the ranch, a high ridge where you could see for miles in every direction. "This is why I stayed," he said as they sat on the ridge watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "When I won this land and everyone said I was crazy, I rode up here and saw all this and knew I'd found home. I knew I'd do whatever it took to build something lasting." Fiona leaned against his shoulder, careful of his still healing ribs. "I never had that feeling of home. We were always leaving somewhere, always chasing the next opportunity that might pan out. But here, I'm starting to understand what you mean." He turned to look at her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Stay, Fiona, not for 20 days or 30. Stay and build this life with me. Yates, we've only known each other for a few weeks. I know, and I know it's fast and probably crazy. But I also know that I'm 24 years old, and I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. I know that you fit into this ranch life like you were meant to be here. I know that I want to wake up every morning and see your face, want to work side by side with you, want to build something together that lasts beyond just the ranch." "Are you proposing?" she asked, her heart racing. "Not yet," he said with a small smile. "I'm asking you to consider it. To think about whether you could see yourself staying permanently, building a real life here. And if the answer is yes, then I'll do this properly. Court you like you deserve, give you time to be sure, and then ask you with a ring and all the right words." Fiona turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. "I don't need time to know what I want, Yates. I've spent 3 years learning to make quick decisions, to trust my instincts, and every instinct I have is telling me that this is right, that you're right. That this life we could build together is exactly what I've been searching for without knowing it. Then say yes," he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. "Say you'll stay." "Yes," she breathed, and then his mouth was on hers, gentle and sure and full of promise. The kiss deepened, and she felt like she was falling and flying at the same time, everything inside her aligning with a certainty that defied logic, but felt absolutely right. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, the sun had nearly set and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Yates held her close, mindful of his ribs but unwilling to let her go. "I need to do this properly," he said. Talk to your father, get a ring, plan something better than a spontaneous proposal on a hillside. I like hillsides, Fiona said, smiling against his shoulder. And I like that just fine. Still, you deserve romance and proper courting. Over the next months, that's exactly what he gave her. Despite the constant demands of ranch life, Yates found ways to court her properly. He took her into Durango on the pretext of business, where they walked the town streets, and he bought her a new dress that actually fit, pale blue cotton that made her eyes bright. They had supper at the hotel restaurant, and he introduced her to the town's prominent citizens as his intended, pride clear in his voice. He took her to meet her family, and while the reunion was emotional and complicated, her father could see that Fiona was genuinely happy. Her siblings were thriving in Durango, and knowing they were settled and safe allowed Fiona to embrace her own future without guilt. Yates spoke to her father formally, asking permission to marry her despite the unconventional way they'd met. Her father, to his credit, looked Yates in the eye and said, "My daughter's choice is the only permission that matters, but I can see she's chosen well, and for that I'm grateful." The ring came 3 months after that first kiss on the hillside. Yates took her back to the same spot at sunset, and this time he knelt despite his ribs, which were finally fully healed, and asked her properly. "Fiona Zimmerman, you came into my life in the strangest way possible, and somehow turned everything upside down in the best way imaginable. You're my partner in every sense of the word. You're strong and capable and brave, and you've made this ranch into a real home instead of just a place I work. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you every single day. Will you marry me?" The ring was simple silver with a small diamond, and it fit perfectly. "Yes," she said, pulling him up and into her arms. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married in Durango on a crisp October day in 1878 with her family present and the ranch hands serving as groomsmen. Dorothy cried through the entire ceremony. The local minister pronounced them man and wife, and when Yates kissed her, Fiona felt a completeness she'd never experienced before. The wedding night was spent at the hotel in Durango, a luxury they both appreciated after months of ranch life. Yates was gentle and patient, taking his time to show her with actions what words couldn't fully express. Fiona discovered that the physical expression of love could be both powerful and tender, that giving herself to someone she trusted completely was liberating rather than frightening. "I love you, Fiona Anderson," Yates whispered in the darkness, holding her close. "Every day for the rest of my life I'll love you." "And I love you," she whispered back, tracing the scars on his shoulder from old injuries. "My unexpected cowboy who turned out to be everything I needed." They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, and life settled into a new rhythm. Fiona took on more of the business management, discovering she had a talent for bookkeeping and planning. Together, they made decisions about the ranch's future, true partners in every sense. They worked hard during the days and held each other close at night, building a life that was exactly what both of them had needed without knowing it. The first year of marriage brought challenges. A harsh winter tested their resources and resolve. They lost some cattle to weather and predators, had to make hard decisions about which animals to sell. But they faced everything together, and somehow that made even the hardest times bearable. Spring brought renewal and hope. The cattle they'd kept through winter produced strong calves. The ranch showed its first real profit, enough to start planning the expansion Yates had dreamed about. And on a warm May morning, Fiona woke up feeling nauseous and realized with a mixture of joy and terror that they were going to have a baby. She told Yates that evening on the porch, watching the sunset. He was quiet for a long moment, then gathered her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear it. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Terrified and thrilled and grateful all mixed together. He pulled back to look at her face. "You're going to be an amazing mother, and you'll be an amazing father." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, despite Fiona's determination to keep working on the ranch for as long as possible. Yates became increasingly protective, worried about her doing too much, but she refused to be treated like she was fragile. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him when he tried to stop her from riding out to check the cattle in her 6th month. "I'm pregnant, not dying." "You're also my whole world," he countered, "and I'm allowed to worry." They compromised as they did on most things. She kept working but agreed to lighter duties and to stop riding by her 7th month. Dorothy fussed over her, feeding her constantly and knitting tiny blankets and clothes. The ranch hands were awkwardly excited, treating Fiona like precious china despite her protests. On a cold January morning in 1880, after 12 hours of labor that tested every bit of strength Fiona possessed, their son was born. He came into the world howling with indignation, a perfect healthy baby with dark hair and his father's gray eyes. Yates held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "He's perfect. You're perfect. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you for this, for him, for everything." They named him Thomas William Anderson, after both their grandfathers. Tommy for short, a little boy who would grow up knowing nothing but love and the wild, beautiful land that was his birthright. Those early months were exhausting and wonderful. Fiona discovered depths of love she hadn't known existed, and watching Yates with their son made her fall in love with him all over again. He was patient and gentle, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with Tommy when he was fussy, singing off-key lullabies that somehow always worked. "I never knew I could love like this," Yates admitted one night, holding their sleeping son. "It's terrifying how much it's possible to love another person." "Two other people," Fiona corrected, kissing his cheek. "You've given me everything I never knew I needed." As Tommy grew, the ranch prospered. They added more land, built a new barn, increased their herd size. Pete eventually retired, and Jim took over as foreman, proving himself more than capable. Samuel met a girl in town and got married, bringing his bride to work on the ranch. Dorothy remained the heart of the household, spoiling Tommy shamelessly. When Tommy was 3, Fiona discovered she was pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy felt easier despite the challenges of chasing after an active toddler. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1883, arriving quickly after only 6 hours of labor. She had her mother's auburn hair and green eyes, and they named her Lily Rose Anderson. "A son and a daughter," Yates said, marveling at the tiny girl in his arms while Tommy climbed onto the bed to inspect his new sister. "Our family is complete." But life had other plans. 2 years later, Fiona realized she was pregnant again, a surprise but a welcome one. This pregnancy was harder, and Fiona struggled more than she had with the previous 2. Yates worried constantly, but Dorothy assured him that every pregnancy was different. Their second son, James Daniel Anderson, arrived in early 1886 after a long, difficult labor that scared everyone. But both mother and baby survived and thrived, and despite the challenging birth, Fiona recovered well. "3 children," she said, watching Yates juggle baby Jamie while Tommy and Lily argued about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. "We've been blessed beyond measure." "We have," he agreed, managing to separate the arguing children while keeping the baby secure. Though I'm thinking we might be done now. I'm not sure I can handle more than 3. Fiona laughed, the sound rich with contentment. Agreed, 3 is perfect. The years rolled on, each bringing its own challenges and joys. There were droughts and good years, lean times and prosperity. Tommy grew tall and serious, taking after his father with a natural talent for working with horses. Lily was spirited and independent, reminding everyone of her mother. Jamie was the charmer, able to talk his way out of trouble and make everyone laugh. Fiona and Yates grew older together, their love deepening with every shared experience. There were arguments, of course, disagreements about ranch management and child rearing, and 1,000 other things. But they'd learned early how to fight fair, how to listen to each other, how to compromise and forgive. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates took Fiona back to the ridge where he'd proposed, leaving the children with Dorothy for the evening. They sat watching the sunset, and he pulled out a new ring, simple gold to go with her engagement ring. 10 years ago, I made you a promise to be worthy of your choice every single day. I hope I've done that. You have, she said softly, letting him slide the ring on. You've given me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. A home, a family, a partnership, everything I never knew I was searching for. I was lost before you, he admitted. Building this ranch but not really knowing why, existing but not truly living. You made it all mean something, Fiona. You and our children, this life we've built together. It's more than I ever dreamed of. She kissed him, long and sweet, tasting of 10 years of love and countless more to come. Remember when we met, when my father traded me like property and you accepted because you needed help with Roundup. How could I forget? Worst and best day of my life. If I could go back and change it, I wouldn't, Fiona said. Not one moment, because it led to this, to us, to everything that matters. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, they made us stronger. She rested her head on his shoulder, looking out at the land that had become as much a part of her as breathing. You once told me that you knew you'd found home when you came to this ridge. I found home in you, Yates. Wherever you are is where I belong. The children grew and eventually started making their own paths. Tommy took over more of the ranch operations, courting a girl from town who proved to be as strong and capable as his mother. Lily declared she wanted to be a teacher and started studying for it, determined to bring education to the rural areas around Durango. Jamie talked about seeing the world beyond Colorado, though he always assured them he'd come back. Through it all, Fiona and Yates remained the center, the foundation upon which their family was built. They'd started with an impossible situation that could have ended in bitterness and resentment. Instead, they'd chosen to build something real, something lasting, something that grew stronger with every passing year. On a warm summer evening in 1898, 20 years after that fateful day when Fiona had been traded for safe passage, they sat on their porch watching the sun set over land that now stretched even farther than when they'd started. Their grandchildren played in the yard, Tommy's twins and Lily's newborn daughter. Jamie was off exploring California but wrote regularly, his letters full of adventure and promises to return soon. No regrets? Yates asked, taking her hand. They were both gray now, marked by time and work and life, but their love had only grown deeper. Not a single one, Fiona said. Well, maybe one. He looked at her, concerned. What's that? I regret that I didn't punch that steer that hurt you back in the beginning, really lay him out properly. Yates laughed, the sound rich and full. You saved my life that day. Pretty sure that's better than revenge. I suppose. She squeezed his hand. You saved mine too, you know, not from physical danger but from a life without purpose or love. You gave me everything, Yates Anderson. We gave each other everything, he corrected. That's what partnership means. As darkness fell and stars began appearing in the vast Colorado sky, they sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way possible and built a life that exceeded all expectations. The ranch spread around them, thriving and prosperous. Their children and grandchildren carried forward their legacy. And in each other, they'd found the kind of love that songs and stories tried to capture but never quite managed, because it was too real, too deep, too perfect in its imperfection. The journey that had begun with Fiona being traded like property had transformed into a love story for the ages, proving that sometimes the worst circumstances can lead to the best outcomes if you're brave enough to take a chance, strong enough to work hard, and wise enough to recognize love when it appears in unexpected forms. And on that porch, watching the stars emerge over the land they'd built together, Fiona and Yates Anderson knew they'd found exactly what they'd both been searching for all along: home, family, partnership, and a love that would endure long after they were gone, living on in the land, the ranch, and the children who carried their legacy forward into the future. Years continued to pass, each season bringing its own rhythm to ranch life. By 1905, Fiona and Yates were in their late 40s, still active but starting to let the younger generation take on more responsibility. Tommy had married his sweetheart, Rebecca, and they'd built a house on the northern section of the ranch, raising their 3 children and managing half the cattle operation. Lily had indeed become a teacher, running a small school in Durango, but visiting the ranch frequently with her husband Marcus and their 2 daughters. Jamie had finally returned from his adventures, bringing with him a bride from San Francisco and wild stories about earthquakes and cable cars and the vast Pacific Ocean. The original ranch house had been expanded twice, growing to accommodate the family gatherings that happened regularly. Dorothy had passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 years prior, and they'd buried her on a hill overlooking the eastern pastures, the place she'd always said had the best view of sunrise. A young woman named Carrie had taken over the cooking, trained by Dorothy herself before she'd passed, and while it wasn't quite the same, the kitchen remained the heart of the home. On a particularly cold winter evening in January 1906, the entire family gathered at the main house for dinner. It was Jamie's birthday, his 30th, and everyone had come despite the snow that had been falling steadily for 2 days. The house was full of noise and laughter, children running through rooms while adults caught up on news and gossip. Fiona moved through the chaos with practiced ease, making sure everyone had enough food, settling disputes between overtired grandchildren, and stealing moments with Yates whenever she could. He stood by the fireplace talking with Tommy and Marcus about spring plans, but his eyes tracked her constantly, still watching out for her after all these years. After dinner, after the children had been put to bed in various rooms throughout the house, and the adults had settled in the large living room with coffee and pie, someone asked Fiona how she and Yates had met. It was Jamie's new wife, Sophia, who didn't know the full story. Fiona looked at Yates and something passed between them, an entire conversation in a single glance. He nodded slightly, and she smiled. "It's an unusual story," Fiona began, settling into her favorite chair while Yates stood behind her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "It was August of 1878, and my family was trying to get to Durango. We were desperate, out of time, with sick children and dwindling supplies." She told the whole story, not shying away from the harsh reality of how she'd been traded for safe passage, how frightened and angry she'd been. She spoke about that first awful day, the difficult weeks that followed, and the gradual shift from resentment to respect to something deeper. "Your grandfather saved my life that day with the steer," Fiona said, looking up at the grandchildren who were old enough to understand. But more than that, he showed me what real partnership looked like. He never treated me as less than, never made me feel like property even though that's how I'd come to be there. He gave me choices, respected my strength, and loved me for who I was rather than trying to change me. And your grandmother, Yates added, his voice still strong despite the years, was the bravest person I'd ever met. She could have been bitter and angry, and she would have had every right. Instead, she gave this place a chance, gave me a chance, and turned a house into a home. Everything good in my life came from the day I met her. Sophia was crying quietly, and Rebecca was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Even the men looked moved, Tommy especially, who'd heard the story before but never quite like this. So you see, Fiona continued, sometimes the worst moments of our lives can become the best things that ever happened to us. Not because the circumstances were good, but because we chose to make something good from them. Your grandfather and I chose each other, chose to build this life, and every person in this room is a result of that choice. Best choice I ever made, Yates said firmly, squeezing Fiona's shoulder. And I'd make it again every single day. The family sat in comfortable silence for a while, digesting the story and its implications. Finally, Tommy raised his coffee cup. To choices, he said. To bravery and love and building something lasting. To choices, everyone echoed, and Fiona felt Yates's hand tighten gently on her shoulder, a gesture of love and solidarity that had become as natural as breathing over their nearly 3 decades together. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was finally quiet, Fiona and Yates lay together in the room they'd shared for 28 years. The bed was the same one from when they'd married, though they'd replaced the mattress twice, and Fiona had made new quilts countless times. Do you ever think about how different your life would have been if my father hadn't been desperate enough to make that trade? Fiona asked, her head resting on Yates's shoulder. All the time, he admitted. I'd probably still be here, still running the ranch. But it would just be a business, not a life. I'd be existing but not really living. You gave me everything that matters, Fiona. We gave each other everything, she corrected, echoing words he'd said years ago. That's what makes it work. He kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips, gentle and sweet with the familiarity of thousands of kisses before. I love you, Mrs. Anderson, more today than yesterday, less than tomorrow. I love you too, Mr. Anderson, more than I ever thought possible. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and if Fiona dreamed, it was of a young woman on a wagon, frightened and angry, who had no idea that the cowboy on the black stallion would become her entire world. It was of choices made and risks taken, of hard work and harder days that had forged something unbreakable. It was of love in its purest form, built on respect and partnership, and the decision to keep choosing each other every single day. The years continued their steady march. By 1912, Fiona and Yates were grandparents to 11 children and great-grandparents to 3, with more on the way. The ranch had grown to over 5,000 acres, one of the largest and most respected operations in southern Colorado. They'd survived droughts and floods, economic downturns and personal tragedies, but they'd survived them together, and that had made all the difference. Tommy had taken over full management of the ranch operations, though Yates still consulted on major decisions. Lily's school had expanded to include children from 3 surrounding counties, and she'd trained several other teachers to help handle the numbers. Jamie and Sophia had settled on a western portion of the ranch, raising horses and 4 adventurous children who had inherited their father's wanderlust and their mother's sophistication. On their 35th wedding anniversary in 1913, the entire family gathered for a massive celebration. Tents were set up on the lawn because the house, even expanded, couldn't hold everyone. There was music and dancing, food enough to feed the entire county, and stories shared late into the night. Yates took Fiona's hand and led her away from the crowd to the ridge that had become their special place. It was harder to climb now, their bodies bearing the weight of decades of hard work, but they made it, settling on the rock where he'd proposed all those years ago. 35 years, Fiona said, looking out at the view that had become as familiar as her own reflection. How did we get here so fast? Living every day to the fullest, Yates replied. Loving hard, working hard, building something that lasted. Do you remember what you said when you proposed? That you'd spend the rest of your life proving you were worthy of my choice. I do. You've done that and more, Fiona said, turning to look at him. His hair was completely gray now, his face deeply lined, but his eyes were the same storm gray that had captured her attention that first day. You've given me a life I never dreamed was possible. You've been my partner in every sense of the word, through every triumph and tragedy. You've loved me well, Yates Anderson. And you've loved me better than I deserved, he replied, cupping her face in his work-roughened hands. You took a lonely cowboy with a dream and helped him build an empire. But more than that, you gave me a family, a real home, a reason to wake up every morning grateful to be alive. We built it together, she insisted, a theme that had run through their entire marriage. Equal partners. Equal partners, he agreed, kissing her with all the tenderness and passion of their 35 years together. When they finally pulled apart, both were crying, but they were happy tears, gratitude for a life well lived and love well earned. The celebration continued below them, music and laughter floating up on the evening air. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. A family built on the foundation of two people who'd met in the worst possible circumstances and chosen to make something beautiful from it. As they walked slowly back down to join the celebration, Yates pulled Fiona close. No regrets? He asked, a question that had become their tradition over the years. Not a single one, she replied, the answer that never changed. You? Only that we didn't have more time, he said honestly, but I'm grateful for every moment we've had. Then we'll make the most of every moment we have left, Fiona declared. We'll love our family, tend our land, and keep choosing each other until the very end. Deal, Yates said, and they rejoined the party, dancing together under the stars like they had on their wedding night, like they'd done countless times since, moving together with the ease of people who'd spent a lifetime learning each other's rhythms. Time moved on, as it always does. Fiona and Yates continued to age, eventually stepping back almost entirely from ranch operations to let the younger generation take full control. They spent their days sitting on the porch, playing with great-grandchildren, telling stories of the old days, and simply enjoying the peace that came from a life well lived. On a warm May morning in 1920, Yates Anderson passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 66, Fiona holding his hand. He'd lived a full life, built something lasting, and died knowing he was deeply loved. The funeral was attended by hundreds, testament to the impact he'd had on the community. Fiona grieved deeply, but not hopelessly. They'd had 42 years together, and she was grateful for every moment. She continued living in the ranch house, surrounded by family, helping where she could and sharing her vast well of wisdom with anyone who asked. She lived 7 more years, long enough to see the ranch continue to prosper, to meet great-great-grandchildren, to know that everything she and Yates had built would endure. On a cool October evening in 1927, at the age of 71, Fiona Zimmerman Anderson passed away quietly, sitting in her favorite chair on the porch, looking out at the land she'd come to love more than anywhere else in the world. They buried her next to Yates on the ridge where he'd proposed, the place they'd returned to again and again throughout their marriage. The headstone was simple, bearing both their names and a single line: equal partners in life and love. Their descendants continued the ranch for generations, each adding their own chapter to the story while never forgetting the foundation. The tale of how Yates and Fiona met, the unusual circumstances that brought them together, became family legend, passed down to each new generation as a reminder that love can grow in the most unlikely places if you're brave enough to let it. The ranch itself became a monument to their partnership. Thousands of acres of carefully tended land that bore witness to what two people could build when they worked together with respect, love, and unwavering commitment. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the Colorado landscape, painting the sky in brilliant colors, it was easy to imagine their spirits still there, sitting on that ridge looking out over everything they'd built, holding hands and grateful for the journey that had brought them together and the life they'd created from such unpromising beginnings. Their story proved that sometimes the most beautiful love stories start in the darkest moments, that circumstances don't define outcomes if you're strong enough to make different choices, and that true partnership, built on respect and equality and daily recommitment, can weather any storm and create something that endures far beyond a single lifetime. Fiona and Yates Anderson had taken a transaction meant to be temporary and transformed it into a legacy of love that would inspire their family for generations to come. A testament to the transformative power of choosing each other every single day, no matter what.